Hi, my name's Patricia McGrath, and I'm interviewing Lee Boek at 3724 Marcia Street and Drive in Silver Lake. And Cheryl Revkin is on camera, and this is May 9th, 2016. We're starting with Lee Boek, and hi, and we met each other, a couple of decades ago at the Silver Lake Garden Club.
Yeah, we were original members, if I remember
That's
correctly.
right. And she was tired of not knowing her neighbors, so she put an ad in the paper, and we showed up. And we've been going to each other's houses ever since. So.
That's right.
And how old are you, and when were you born?
I am about to become 75.
Wow.
On August 28th, I was born in 1941 in Monrovia, California, when the hospital in Monrovia was a house.
Okay.
And my grandparents on my father's side lived in Monrovia, and my grandparents on my mother's side lived in Arcadia, and my mom and dad were high school sweethearts. And my dad quit high school at 17 for a year, I think, and then he went back at 18 and finished high school at 19, mainly because of my mother, and he was in love with her, and she was quite a beauty and a really wonderful person, as they both were. And
Did he have any aspirations of becoming a preacher? Or?
no, I don't think so at that time. I think at that time he had aspirations of maybe being a baseball player. He was quite a great athlete, and he had offers from the Pittsburgh Pirates and stuff, but ultimately decided to marry my mother and start a family. And he had a painting company in Monrovia for many years, and for several years, and he was doing really great for a real young fella. And then he hired a bookkeeper who ran off with all the money to Mexico. At least that's the story I heard. And we were deeply in debt and had to leave Los Angeles and go to Enterprise, California to live with his parents. My dad was very proud. I'm sure my mother's parents would probably have helped bail them out some way. They had a little bit of money, and they weren't wealthy, but they were more middle class, whereas my father's family was... He was the oldest of 12 children, and they were poor, and so they couldn't.
In Enterprise, when they moved.
Well, yeah, but they were up in Enterprise, up near Redding, California, and we went up there because we could stay with them.
How many brothers and sisters went up with you, or?
Well, at that time there were 3 boys,
okay.
Tom and Ken and myself, and later, after we moved to Sacramento, I think in maybe 1950 something. I was 12, so I don't know when that would have been.
You added siblings.
We added another baby brother.
Okay.
He's my baby brother. I think is 65 now, or 63, I guess.
Do you have a picture of your siblings?
Is this actually you over here? Is this you?
Yeah, that was me when I was born.
Can we get a picture of you first?
Yeah.
Gotta get a picture of you.
Oh, I won a baby contest. My mother was very proud.
That was in Monroe.
Beautiful baby.
Gorgeous baby. You weren't the first, right?
Yes, I was. I'm the
eldest.
eldest of.
Okay.
I'm the oldest of 4 boys.
Okay.
No girls. We never had a girl.
Got it. Okay, now your family.
There's me and Dad.
Oh, lovely.
Back in 41. This probably was just before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because when Pearl Harbor was bombed, my dad joined the Navy. His brother was at Pearl Harbor and wounded there.
Ooh.
His brother Archie Beck. And so he joined the Navy. He never saw much any action at all. He spent most of the time in the hospital in San Francisco, but Mother would drive with me laying in the front seat of the car from LA to San Francisco a couple times 1 year so we could go see Dad. But here was me and Dad. He was my buddy, and we had a lot of fun that was 1942. This is my I think this is my aunt. I think my mother was a little tight here. This is my grandmother, I think, one of these women. But this was taken when they took a trip up the coast. I have a wonderful letter from my grandmother writing all about a wonderful trip up the coast of California.
What car?
She was quite a good writer. I don't know what that is. And these, I don't know if you can see them well enough. This is me in a high school play. I was into acting very early in life. So in our grammar school, this was in the 8th grade, I played the mother of a boy who came home with a violin in his case, and his father, who was a bank robber, was very angry because he didn't have a Tommy gun in his violin case. And I played the mother, and it was great fun, and we were pretty funny. And we got the skit out of a magazine similar to Mad Magazine. It wasn't Mad Magazine, but it was similar. And that was at Carmichael Grammar School. My very first job was another one. Now this is my brother's. I don't know if you can see.
Is that all 4 of you?
That's 3 of us. The other guy is a neighbor boy. This is Ken. Let's see. Tom and me. And I think that boy might be Alan or Larry. I can't remember which. This is my brothers and I. This is a cute picture, I think.
Now is that you
Shows
so
how poor
tall?
we were. Yeah, I was the tall one.
Does it look like you had poor clothes on? Is that what you're saying? I mean, it looks
Yeah,
like a
we
cute house.
we were all dressed up, but it wasn't fancy stuff, that's for sure.
You hadn't outgrown your pants.
That was in '48, so we were living up in Wairika, California about then. And baseball was always a big part of our life.
And
My
that was your
boys,
mom?
that's my mother and my brother Tom and I. And that's my grandparents on my mother's side. I don't know if you can actually see
Were they
these
born
pictures.
here?
They were from, my grandmother was from Sioux City, Iowa on my mother's side, and my grandfather was from Chicago. He called everybody Bub, and he loved the races, and he was a traveling salesman for Swift and Company. And she was an amazing woman. She just had a great spirit about her. And any good thing that we have, we often trace back to Grandma. Kirk was their last name. She was a King, and he was a Kirk.
Oh, he was a Kirk, and she was a King.
Is this whose phone?
Here, it's my phone.
Can you turn it?
I'll just turn it off. Sorry about that.
Is this up in Wairika? Lee?
This picture, I don't know, it's probably in L.A. in the 20s. I don't know what, oh, that's the backside. This is my brothers and I as we got a little older, and there we have the baby brother.
Ah,
I don't know if you can see
that was in
these.
Sacramento?
And this is really early when we lived on Lime Avenue in Monrovia before we moved north, Dad, Mom, and
Yeah.
Tom, Ken, and I. Very close with my brothers. All my brothers live within 5 miles of each other in Mendocino County, up around Ukiah, just north of Ukiah. And we talk on the phone almost every day, most of us. So I talk to 1 or 2 of them every day. This is my dad in his Navy uniform, and Mom and I. I don't know if you can actually see these, can you?
Yes.
Good. This is these are my sons. This is Nathan, my oldest son, and my youngest son, Daniel, who died when he was 29. He started having seizures when he was 9 months old, and he never stopped having them. And he died in a state home in Sacramento, choked to death on a rubber glove. He put everything in his mouth. And, he was severely retarded and epileptic. He had a brain cell explosion every 10 seconds.
How long did you live with him?
His mother and I had him until he was 6 years old, and then it was very hard on us. We
That's
were
a
very
long
young. We got married when she was 18 and I was 21. This is another picture of him before he got sick, before he started having the seizures. He was a beautiful baby boy. This is the church where we got married and some of the congregation there at that church. This is the very first Earth Day. This is skipping around, but this is the first Earth Day at Davis, California. At this time, I had a radio show called the Survival Revival Hour on KZAP radio, and I was known in that area as Brotherly Love. So, and this Earth Day, we were the honored guests because our show was all about ecology in 1970, 71.
Was that on the
And
campus?
we were trying to save the American River. We lived on the banks of the American River. And so we talked about ecology, and I would preach about the war. It was run like a pseudo-evangelical thing, but it was all very political and social and musical. We had a great band called the Greater Carmichael Traveling Street Band and Sanctified Singers. And yeah, this was on the campus at UC Davis, the very first Earth Day.
What year was that?
God, I don't know.
71?
Yeah, something like that, 70, 71, maybe even 68, I don't know. This is a bunch of the church kids and my brothers and I and some of the girls from the church. We were on a field trip to San Francisco when we were teenagers.
Now, was your father becoming
My father
a
had
preacher?
by then become a preacher in
Itinerant
Sacramento.
preacher? Or
Yeah, he was what we call a jackleg preacher. He had a job and then he had a church. We cleaned out a storefront cleaning establishment on Auburn Boulevard and started a church. And it was a very fundamentalist church called the Church of Christ. And we were in the 1 cup division of the Church of Christ. We believed you had to have 1 cup on the communion table. And if you used more than one, that wasn't good. And we were also against musical instruments in the church and Sunday school and the like. And it was very fundamentalist. And but you know, it was a real community of people and very familial. And we made a
lot of fellowship.
Yeah, a lot of fellowship, a lot of singing, a lot of good dinners together, and a lot of being together, so that you really felt close with everybody. And so I had lots of adults who were really interested in who I became and how I turned out, because my dad was the preacher, and of course I was his oldest son, and I was learning to be a preacher. From the time I was 12 years old, I started giving talks, and by the time I was 17, I was ordained to be a preacher. And then I hit the sawdust trail and started traveling around the United States, and did so for about 10 years, preaching sometimes 50 nights in a row.
They say preaching is the greatest profession.
No, yeah, oh, they do. Huh? Well, I don't know. It was good, but
Now, was
I
that
got out
when you
of
would
it.
actually set up a tent?
well, sometimes we had tents, but often we traveled from town to town and held 10-day gospel meetings. And we would often live with the people in their homes, so I had to learn how to be an unobtrusive house guest. And I had a wonderful mentor named M. Linwood Smith from Brookhaven, Mississippi. And he taught me how to be, bought me nice suits, and helped me to dress and learn how to, you know, be a preacher.
Did he create your itinerary?
No, I
did it
did pretty
yourself?
well. I would travel on his itinerary, and then
I
I
see.
would preach at neighboring churches. And I would always read his text for the evening, and often lead singing, because I loved to sing, and I could lead the singing often.
Where was this?
This is my brothers and I with our beloved cousins Sandy and Lindy, our girl cousins. My mother's sister had 2 girls, and this is at Knott's Berry Farm, actually, back when it was really a berry farm, before they had all those fancy rides.
Was that the entrance to the gold mine?
I think it might be.
Yeah, I think it's still there.
You were probably there too.
I was there too.
And this is my brother Tom and I. He was my, oh no. Oh yeah. This is my brother Tom and I on my wedding day.
Sorry.
That's cool.
Let me get that a little better. There we
Closer.
go. On your wedding day?
On my wedding day,
Wow.
In
when
Sacramento?
I married Lola Gay Long, my childhood sweetheart. We had held hands in church from the time she was 12 until she was 18 when I married her.
Oh,
And this is her.
oh,
She was quite beautiful,
that
wonderful.
glamorous.
She passed away a couple of years ago. We miss her. But we weren't together when she died. But this is a picture of the Yuba City flood.
Oh my God.
And this is the church house in Yuba City. My dad and my Uncle Archie went there in a boat and sailed around. And this is when we learned about the devastation of floods when we were boys.
That's not Yuba City, Arizona, is it?
Yuba City, California, just
California.
north of Sacramento.
Oh, I'm thinking of Yuma.
No, it's about 50 miles north of Sacramento.
Okay.
This is my mom and dad when they were courting prior to their getting married. And this is their wonderful house that my grandmother and grandfather had in Arcadia. It was out along the Arroyo out there, right across from, I can't remember, was it the Crystal Dairy? No, I don't think there's a dairy out there. It was across the street from that dairy on Arrow Highway. But this is a beautiful house. And much later in life, when Dad was already gone, Mom and I went out there one day. She and I walked up a plank into the house, which had now become a crack house. And no one was there, and we walked around. I was amazed by how much smaller and more traditional it looked, after I had by then painted hundreds of houses in LA of this style. So it looked much less exotic than it did to me when I was a little boy, and we were living in a tent and in a shed along the river in Redding, and would come down and visit this house, which to us was like a mansion then. But of course now, as a grown man, it looked a lot different. But it was a beautiful place. And they had completely different kind of values than we had, and so it was kind of nice.
360 degrees.
And this is the church where my father started this church, and we took the cleaners and turned it into a church.
Storefront?
This is the storefront church.
Cool.
The rest of this says Church of Christ. This is my dad, and these are my brothers and our neighbor Mike Poole, one of our buddies.
Are you in there?
When you have, and this is me here.
The tall one.
Lee, Tom, Ken, and Mike Poole, and Dad. And we, when you have 3 or 4 boys, you always have 3 or 4 extras.
What was the pool part? Your mom's name?
Mike Poole. No, he was just a neighbor boy.
Oh, he was a neighbor.
But he was part of the family.
But your last name was Beck, right?
Our last name was Beck, B-O-E-K.
And that was was that a German name? Or?
Well, I guess it's German. If you go to Germany, right along the border of Holland, you'll find lots of B-O-E-K Becks. I don't know, maybe reminds me of South African kind of names.
Yeah.
But when I'm in the hospital, when I've been in the hospital here, and it says on the thing that I'm Beck Lee, the nurses and the doctors often think I'm going to be a Korean guy when they come to see me. And this is me standing on the back of a flatbed truck, and this is the day I became known as Brotherly Love. I'm pitching the Rainbow vacuum cleaner because that's how I worked my way in college, was selling vacuum cleaners door to door. And I started doing that towards the end of my career as a preacher. When I would come home, I needed to work. So I started selling vacuum cleaners, which was a real dichotomy to my life. And this one used water, so I turned it into a pitch about ecology, washing the air and all that sort of thing. And I'm standing in front of City Hall in San Francisco pitching this in an anti-war demonstration in the early 70s. And from this, we were invited to do our show on, we were invited to do our show on KQED, San Francisco, and then invited to do it on KZAP Radio, where we had a regular show on Sunday nights for a while. Good little while.
The Brotherly Love.
The Brotherly Love Survival Revival Hour.
And you did an hour?
It was a half hour. And it was satire, and it was funny, and it was fun, and we often had really great music. We had a really good band, and we also hooked up with another band called the Frontier. Originally it was called the Frontier Constabulary with Mitch Greenhill, Maine Smith, and Mark Spolstra, and others. And eventually I managed that band after I broke up with my band and we stopped performing. That was a few years later. This is my cousin Sandy and me when we were children. This is some of my mother's family to the side of their house. My grandparents were this is my great-grandfather. I'll have another picture of him in a bit. But I adored my great-grandfather. He was in his 90s when I was 5 and 6. And I sat at his feet while he sat in a big chair in front of the big window in that house I showed you. And he told me what he was doing the day Abraham Lincoln was assassinated.
Wow.
So that was pretty far out.
What was he doing?
He was playing baseball.
In California?
No, in Iowa.
Iowa.
He was from Sioux City, Iowa. And I got to go to Sioux City and see the school that my grandmother and he, my grandmother for sure went to when I was working in 1988 in the Jesse Jackson campaign. And we were working in Council Bluffs, and then Marlene and I, my wife at the time, we went up to Sioux City, mainly because I wanted to see it, and also to pick up our buddy Jack Slater, who was part of the 20 people, the California 20 who went to work in Jesse's campaign. And so we met Jesse
He was
Jackson
campaigning
for president. He was running against Dukakis.
Right.
which was funny because he always kept telling everybody to go to Dukakis. And he was running against him. I thought that was funny. But anyway, these are some of my relatives, many of whom I don't know, although this is my Auntie Flo and her girlfriend Dee Dee. They lived together, and she died of diabetes. And I think this is my Aunt Rosalie and my grandfather Walter and my great-grandfather. And I don't know who this woman is or
What's
this
your great-grandfather's name again?
His great,
The great.
you know, I don't, his last name was King, but I can't remember.
We'll run into him again.
Yeah, I'll figure it out at some point. But this is my my brothers and I and Mike Poole, and this is our cousin Sharon. She lived with us for a couple of years. My Uncle Walt left her with us. Her mother had mental problems and was put in Fairview State Hospital, and the father, he was trying to get a foothold, and he left her with us, and we thought she was going to maybe grow up with us, but then one day he came, and I was in the 7th grade, I think, and she and her dad came to the door to tell me goodbye, and I didn't see her again till she was 18, and shortly after that she was killed in a motorcycle accident, just riding around the block with a guy. She was a sweet girl. This is my great-grandfather. I don't know why I can't remember his name right now. His first name. I just knew him as Grandpa King. And when Grandpa King died, we were living in a small house in Wairika, California. And they came and told us that Grandpa had died, and I thought it was Grandpa King. And I cried and cried and cried, and then Mom said, no, it was Grandpa Kirk that died.
His son.
No, his son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
My grandfather. He died at 54 of a heart attack in the driveway of their home there that I showed you. And
so you felt much better.
I felt guilty because I felt so much. I felt
so glad that
I'm glad it wasn't Grandpa
So what
King.
mixed feelings?
Yeah, it was weird. But I was very close to this grandpa. And this is my brothers and I as we celebrated Christmas. Shortly after this, our dad convinced us that Christmas was a pagan holiday, and we stopped celebrating Christmas.
And also Halloween and all the other holidays.
Well, mainly Christmas. I think it was more than a pagan holiday. It was expensive.
Yeah.
But anyway, I wouldn't impugn his belief system, but it was painful for us.
Yeah.
And of course, eventually when we grew up, we went back to enjoying Christmas, at least on a certain level, with our families. And this is Mom and me running away from Mom in our house in Monrovia. Back probably in 42, it says. And this is some more of the teenagers at an outing. And there's another one at the church with some of my aunts and some more of my cousins.
How long was he at the Church of Christ?
Well, my dad was a Church of Christ preacher for many years. This particular church lasted a few years, I don't know how many. Eventually I went off preaching, and they bought a church house on Whitney Avenue in Carmichael. So we had more of a churchy looking church than a storefront eventually. And then eventually he also started traveling. After I started traveling as an evangelist, he started traveling as an evangelist too once he retired, and did that for a few years, and then settled in Orland, California, and then ran a trailer park in just up out of Sacramento, a real nice trailer park. He and Mom ran that until they totally retired, and then they retired in Paradise, California, and Dad died in Paradise, fittingly enough, and then we moved Mom over to Ukiah, where my brothers lived, and she passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. And she died at 93, and she had a great life, and she was really a sweet, beautiful person. And he was too. And this is me in my hippie years. I lived on a place called Harmony Hill in Fair Oaks. We were the hippies on the hill, and we scandalized the town, but also put it on the map because we had our radio show. We had 5 houses and about 25 people and gardens, and this little girl here is about 45 years old, 48 years old, and has a beautiful family and still lives in Fair Oaks, and her mom and dad are good buddies of mine. and were part of the clan. We had a nice little clan there. And I lived in 3 different places. At this time I was living in a small cabin behind her parents' house on Harmony Hill, where I was paying $45 a month for a little cabin. Those were good years. In
Now, what year?
74, right
74.
around 73, 74. And this is me going off to preach. Somebody made this little caption and said, "Guess who needs some new threads?"
You were young.
But that was me, yeah.
Well, how old were you?
My son once took one of these pictures at this time and put on Facebook, "My dad was Elvis."
How old were you there?
I was 17, 18.
And who is this?
And I don't even know who
Don't
that
know.
is.
Okay. But you were
It's
17.
a church lady, one of the women.
When
from
you
the
went
church.
off to preach, but then you came back at 19 to graduate from high
Oh,
school.
well, yeah, I would come back periodically. Well, I had my girlfriend Lola was still living, finishing up high school, and of course, my mother and dad and my brothers, I missed them terribly when I traveled, because we were a very close family. So
And this was no
I would
longer
have
in
to go back.
Monrovia.
This was in Sacramento,
Sacramento.
in Carmichael, California. We grew up in Carmichael. My parents bought a house on North Avenue in Carmichael with an acre of land, and we raised pigs and a lamb and a steer for meat, and we had gardens and strawberries, and we lived in a rural kind of setting, which was having a lot of houses built nearby and around as Carmichael was
Which
becoming
you still have gardens and settings.
Yeah, my brothers and I,
You're still growing
we
food
all
in
live
back
like
here.
this. We all have gardens and often raise animals, and we live, my son, he came down here, stepped into my backyard when he was 15. He says, "You're living just like you lived in Fair Oaks." And a lot of the kids from Ukiah, when they come and visit, they say, "This is just like your brother's place." And some of them dubbed it a backyard. Instead of a backyard,
Yeah,
they dubbed
that's
it
cute.
a backyard. Yeah. There I am again. That's the one my son said, "My dad was Elvis." There I am graduating from, I think, the 8th grade there, or maybe high school, I'm not sure which. And this was our home in Carmichael. It was a nice little house with a garage, which they made into 2 bedrooms, and it had a bathroom in the back. I don't know what that is. I think that's me and a bunch of church people during my preaching days. And these were my mentors, all the preachers, many of the young preachers from my church. This picture was probably taken maybe in Oklahoma at the camp meeting, at the Sulphur camp meeting, which I attended when I was 17, and I looked forward to it because these guys were my heroes when I was growing up, and they would come through the country and stay. They would always stay at our house, so I got to know them, and I would try to develop my own style of preaching. Like each one of them was different, they all had funny styles, and it was quirky and interesting, and of course very religious. This is another picture of my son Daniel Curtis Beck. That was in 1975. Now this is the first house I stayed in Oklahoma. When my 17th summer, I traveled with a preacher by the name of Billy Jack Ivy, and this was his parents' house in Oklahoma. And we stayed there for a month, and I hoed cotton with them and their dad. They had a cistern for water, and all this area is surrounded by fields and open spaces. And the very first night I was there, they put me so that my head was at the foot of the bed so I could catch the breeze, because it was very hot there in the summer. It was in July. And the very first night we had to go to the cellar because a tornado was coming.
Yeah, I was going to say tornado.
And I made several trips to the cellar, and on one trip to the cellar I wrote my dad and mom a letter from the cellar. I was in a cellar with an Indian woman and her 2 sons and her mother, who had just gotten out of a mental hospital, and we were all down in this cellar. And then the grandmother started telling me about how the tornado sucks people out of the cellar sometimes. So I wrote a letter to my dad, and he carried it around to different churches and read it to people. He was quite proud of that letter. This was my mentor, M. Linwood Smith from Brookhaven, Mississippi. This was his house in Mississippi where he lived, and with his spinster aunt and his grandmother. His mother died giving him birth. Now this was a day when I moved from the little cabin on Harmony Hill over to the log cabin on Harmony Hill, and I moved using a wheelbarrow, and I paid Jimmy Borsdorf, the fiddler in our band, $100 to sit on the roof and fiddle while I moved all my stuff.
So you'd feel better
So,
moving?
yeah, so I'd be cheered up, and he was sitting up. Then I always liked the idea of a fiddler on the roof. So there he was.
There you go.
And this was one of the churches where I preached. I have several pictures of various churches. I'm not sure I know exactly where they all are now, but this was kind of a typical scene in the churches where I preached.
This was Midwest, Lee?
Yeah, it would be in the Midwest or often in the deep South. I preached all across the South, and in California. And then a little bit in the North. We never went into New England, but we went as far as Pontiac, Michigan at one point. This is a house in Wairika, California, where we lived for a little while. This is the church in Brookhaven, Mississippi, out in the country where M. Linwood Smith grew up, my mentor. And that's me standing on the porch of the church.
Oh,
It was a beautiful church.
Oh,
I don't know, did we have this picture already?
that's your
not
wife.
that one.
We got that one, okay, yeah. She was my first wife. She was married to another guy, and I preached her funeral. He invited me to come and speak. He said I'd know what to say. He said, you had her the first 10 years, I had her the next 20, and you'll know what to say. And then this is our wedding day. You could just get one or two of one of those probably. This is a nice shot of my grandson Cody and I at the old Fair Oaks Bridge. It was shot by my buddy Hugh Gorman, wonderful artist from Fair Oaks. And I love this picture.
The bridge is how old?
My grandson. That's a real old bridge. We used to ride across that in a car when we were boys, but now it's a footbridge and part of the recreation of the area. But I held Easter sunrise services on that bridge when I was known as Brotherly Love. My band would play there. I performed weddings on that bridge. I did a float in down the river from that bridge, and I chanted the sun up with Captain Ecology on that bridge one morning on Easter sunrise service that we held, and it became kind of an icon for our community in Fair Oaks in the days of Brotherly Love and the Greater Carmichael Traveling Street Band. And this is my dad when he owned a boat, and I think it was maybe his loosest time in life. And I wish I'd have paid more attention to him right in that period, but of course I was caught up in my own life. But I was happy to see that picture of him. And these are, this is William and Monique, my adopted grandchildren. They actually are adopted children of one of my son's girlfriends, Melissa Clark, and my grandson Daniel is their big brother. This is Daniel. This is a few years ago. Daniel's now 24 years old. Cody's now 27. Nathan, my son, is now 53. And this is me. I'm, as I told you, 75
And
almost.
who's this up here again?
Where? Here?
Yeah.
That's Cody.
Cody?
Cody, Daniel, Lee, and Nathan. Martin Nathaniel Beck, named after Martin Luther King, and my grandfather, Nathaniel Beck.
There you go.
And then this is some of my publicity shots from my days here in LA, trying to get gigs as an actor in Hollywood. I had 5 good years on television. I had little parts here and there, so I could qualify for medical insurance even, so I kept pretty busy. I was on Mama's Family and Home Improvement and Mad TV and Webster a couple of times and several others, and had good luck in that regard for a few years. And then when Marlene got ill, then I had to quit. So Marlene was my wife that I married here, and I'll show you pictures of her in a minute. This was our Brotherly Love Survival Revival publicity shot, back when I had black hair and was younger. Okay, and then this is a shot of my dear mother, Molly Bainbridge.
There's a little glare on that.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Molly Bainbridge was her name, and she is a great And then I attended, when I came to LA after everything had played out in Sacramento, and I had a buddy here by the name of Mitch Greenhill, who I hadn't seen for a couple of years. He was the lead guitar player in the band Frontier that I managed. And he had come back to LA because his father, Manny Greenhill, owned a company that managed Joan Baez and Taj Mahal and Doc Watson and numerous others. And so Mitch was about to take over the company, or going to inherit the company. Well, I was just telling you about how I met Marlene. Mm-hmm. So I took a class, and I was staying with Mitch here in LA, and his wife Carol Burleson, and I took an acting class at the church in Ocean Park, and Marlene Rasnick was the teacher. She was quite a beautiful teacher, and so we kind of flashed on each other, and then I went to New Mexico for a while. And then I came back to marry Mitch and his wife, because even though I quit being a preacher per se, I have continued to do alternative weddings. To this very day, I have weddings in Seattle and in Ukiah in August of this year coming up, which I'm looking forward to. And so I often marry people and do occasional funerals. And I've also done a car mitzvah at one point for Mitch's son when he got his driver's license. So anyway, Marlene was the teacher, and when I came back to do the wedding, I invited her to go with me to the wedding. And after that, we were married for 21 years. We were married in our garden out back and had a great life. Unfortunately, Marlene got cancer when she was 52 years old, and she died when she was 57 of ovarian cancer. So I took care of her until she died, and we were very close and had a great life together. And she performed just months. She was a wonderful performer, an improvisational actress, and she was able to perform one more time just before she passed away in 2001. She died not long after 9/11.
Which one is she?
This is her. This is a picture. We were doing workshops with the deaf at this time, and we had a great experience there. We had a grant to do theater games workshops.
She must have had a wig, because I know she lost all her hair.
No, she never wore a wig. She preferred to go bald, and her hair grew back, and it was beautiful when it did grow back. But and this is a publicity photograph from a play we did called Coming Close, which was about Marlene's family. I played her mother in the play, and I played her grandmother, and I played her father, and I played myself. And she played her mother as a young woman, and her mother's best friend, Ethel. And it was quite a good play. We got rave reviews in all the local papers. And had
What was the name of it again?
Coming Close. We did a lot of good shows. We did numerous shows together, and it was usually she and me and a jazz musician. And
where did you perform?
All over town. We did a lot at the Episcopalian Church. We worked a lot with Sunset Hall, the seniors at Sunset Hall, home for old radicals. And we also we did shows in a lot of theaters and places around town. Our home base was the church in Ocean Park, which is where the Public Works Improvisational Theater Company was started by Marlene and Dale Unson. And here's another picture of Marlene just before she passed away.
In the garden.
This is out in the garden. She had an amazing personality. She was full of life and didn't want to die.
It was 2000.
And her last signal to me was she winked at me. That was the last communication I had with her as she was dying. So I knew she was ready to go when the time came. But it was tough, I'll tell you. So then back over here on a happier note, this is my brothers and I again. Another time. Can you see it?
There. Oh, wait.
Oh, okay.
There we go. It's there's a little glare there.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry for all these
That's good.
random photographs. Here we are in a more mature level with our beautiful mom. And we just keep getting older. And then a few years ago, about 8 or 9 years ago, after Marlene had died and been gone for a few years, then I met Sophie Butorov, and she's a wonderful person who lives here with me. And she introduced me to France. I'd been to France already, but she has introduced me to a lot of wonderful people in France, and she and I go to France every now and then, and she's there right now, enjoying being with her mother, who's in her mid-80s, and so she's a very devoted daughter, and so she goes home to her mother fairly often, 2 or 3 times a year to be with her, and the rest of the time she's here with me, and we have quite a life here.
She also makes all the good food when you do.
She makes all the good food. This is she and some of our lovely young women that we love, part of our family. We have a lot of young people who come here all the time. We have a whole entourage of beautiful young people and friends, and really quite fortunate to live with all these beautiful and wonderful people.
When did you start the art share? I know you had the.
Well, I didn't start Art Share, but I started
You started
working at
working
Art
at
Share,
Share.
I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm doing a show there called Story File, which is, we're doing it, we were doing it monthly, but now we do it monthly, but not there necessarily, and we don't always do it monthly.
Sometimes it's in Venice.
Sometimes in Venice. We have another show we do in Venice called Voice in the Well, which is a public works production, and it's a literary salon, emceed by Eric Vollmer, who's part of my company. And Story File we do at Art Share and at various galleries around town. And then I perform at lots of storytelling events because I have quite a repertory by now of stories I can tell you. and I participate in collaboration with other artists and activists. We've been doing a series of readings called If the Shoe Fits, about solitary confinement, trying to get rid of that horrible, torturous thing. And I've been involved in lots of political activities in that sort of genre, and all my life since my preaching days. In fact, it was the civil rights movement that kind of helped me get out of the church, because I got involved in starting a black church in the panhandle of Florida, the home of the Ku Klux Klan, and had it burnt down and my life threatened and that sort of thing. And although I wasn't engaged in the real world, I got a real taste of the real world in that. And after that, then after I quit being a preacher and basically got kicked out of the church because of my liberal views, after that, I just have been an activist and an actor and a performer the rest of the time.
And a producer.
And a producer. And
What do you produce?
I produce all my shows and do a lot of different things like that.
Do you produce Art Share still?
Well, I produce shows at Art Share, yeah. But no, Art Share has its own structure. I just do shows there occasionally.
The article just.
Well, this was a nice article in the Pasadena Weekly, I think, or I don't know what they call it. Yeah, Pasadena Weekly, oddly enough. And it was written at the behest of Mike the Poet, good friend of mine, Mike Songson from KCET. But the writer, oh shoot, I thought I'd have her name on here.
Should have it at the bottom.
Ah, shit. Well, anyway, my apologies to the writer. But it was a nice article. I just happened to see it sitting back in there.
You want to show us the picture of the Silver Lake Garden Club?
This is the Silver Lake Garden Club. She wants me to show it to you.
There's a lot of glare, so can you, yeah, that's good.
I got it.
Now hold on a minute, let me get a little closer. Okay, do you want to,
So this is the Silver Lake Garden Club, which was started how many years ago?
21.
21 years ago. And usually it's me and a bunch of real nice women. We get together. There are other guys who sometimes show up, and I'm always glad to see them. But this is a great bunch of people, and we just love to garden. I think this month the gathering will be right here at my place in a couple of weeks, or maybe next week. I'm not sure.
Every month we take
We
turns
move around.
whose house it's going to be
We
at.
sit around, eat, and talk about gardens.
And Aldi's house is where we go for Christmas.
Yeah, we have an
Usually
annual Christmas
Christmas
party, which
party.
is always fun. But it's a very nice
But I have to say
social
that
group.
about 2 years ago, it was Lee's turn to have a party at his house. So we came in, set up, had all our stuff together, had our wine, all our food out and everything. And you weren't here. And we
Right.
just kept, we still had our club meeting and our party. And
Yeah, I came home. I had
it's free.
forgotten
It's
that
not
it was.
really a club. It's just sort of a neighborhood gathering,
I think I
And
had
then
had I
you
forgotten or
Yeah, I think you actually had forgotten, and then you showed up and wondered what all these people were doing in your house. But you'd left the front door open,
oh yeah, well,
which is always open,
Don't
like
tell
some
anybody.
people do.
yeah. So yeah,
Why
that
why
was
don't you sit next to Lee and hold that picture
That
just
was
one
kind
more
of
time?
funny and embarrassing. Fun and embarrassing.
The name of this lady, that's what I was.
Okay. Was B Gold part of that group?
B Gold was part of that group.
She was.
And B
Oh
Gold.
yeah, Be Gold.
Actually,
yes,
B
of
Gold
course.
painted a portrait of us that Susan has in her house of all of us.
Yeah, B. She moved too far away to attend very often now. But
Right.
she was a wonderful part of the group.
Well, let's see a big hug. Old friends. Okay. Great.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Appreciate
It's
it.
fun.
Well, I've been to the river and I've been baptized. I've been changed from the. Well, I've been to the river and I've been baptized. I've been changed from the creature that I was. I've been changed. I've been newborn. All my life has been rearranged. Oh, what a difference it made when the Lord came and stayed in my heart. Oh, yes, I've been changed. I've been changed. I've been newborn. All my life has been rearranged. I tell you what a difference it made when the Lord came and stayed in my heart. Oh, yes, I've been changed. I'm sleeping in the living room in a very tiny house in Wairika, California. I'm sleeping on a fold-out bed in the living room, fold-out couch. And I'm looking back at the kitchen, which is all lit up like a little stage. And I see my mother over by the sink with her long, flowing gray hair. She had gray hair from the time she was 18 years old. And she's going back and forth to the little porcelain table. Dad has already left. My two brothers, Tom and Ken, are sleeping in the back room on bunk beds in the room where Mom and Dad slept. Dad had a job painting. We needed a job bad at this particular time. It was freezing cold there in Wairika. Why, I had fallen I'd stepped into a mud puddle that I sunk clear up to my chest. Of course, I was a lot littler then, but it was very scary to be in such cold weather. I was sitting there looking back at this beautiful little scene. And there was my mother, and the radio was up on the shelf above the refrigerator, and it was playing. The smells of bacon, eggs, and toast filled the air, and I just closed my eyes. Some fine morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away in the morning when I die to God's celestial shore. I'll fly away, I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. you got there, you were going to be there forever and ever. You were going to live forever and ever. Time without end. And as he started talking about forever and ever, I started getting scared. I never had thought of forever and ever. When I tried to put it together in like a little ball, I tried to figure out what was forever and ever. Something without any end. I got real scared and I started to cry. I just burst into tears and my mother came over, honey, what's the matter? And I just kept crying. I couldn't stop crying for anything. And I didn't want to tell Mom that I was crying because I was scared forever and ever. And I was scared of going to heaven even now. Imagine how I felt later. I found out there was also not only forever and ever, not only a heaven where you could go to after you die, but there was a devil's hell. In fact, there was a devil. A guy in a red suit, a guy with horns, a guy with a long tail whose job was to make me do bad. And I did bad. I did bad plenty of times. It was scary. And that devil was kicked out of heaven by God. Thanks a lot. Because he was so bad up there. And then he came down here and started messing with everybody down here. Not only that, but that devil had a lake of fire. A fire and brimstone. And when you die, if you haven't been good, you're going to be thrown into that lake of fire and brimstone. Where you'll burn forever and ever. Just think, just think of waterboarding forever and ever. Only with fire. Horrible, the most degrading and horrible thing you can think of. Forever and ever. About 10 years later, or about 6 years later, about 4 years later, I'm laying in bed in Carmichael, California. My folks bought a little house out in Carmichael on an acre of land. And I'm laying in bed, and it's in the middle of the night. It's hot summer. I don't have any blankets on, and I'm just sweating like crazy. I'm scared to death. I'm laying there listening to me as I can. Moo. Cigar airplanes that are flying overhead from the Strategic Air Command. Except what if one of them, or some of them, are Russian planes? I'm listening as intently as I can for the boom of the bombs. I've been watching a lot of war movies. I was scared to death. I was in a cold bombs. And they must have thought that they could get through because at school we were being taught to get down under our desk. Put our heads down on our desk and our hands behind our heads to protect us from the atom bomb. About that time, I came home from school one day. And as usual, when I came home from school, I just walk on in the house, then I go right straight to the kitchen, open up that refrigerator and start making a snack for after school, you know. Or I go to the cupboard and I get peanut butter and then I get all kinds of stuff and make a nice big sandwich. I love Dagwood sandwiches, so I try to find a little bit of everything to put on them. But the day as I came to that door, my dad came to the door and said, stay outside. You play outside. I wasn't allowed in. I stood outside. I looked in the house through the big bay window on the house that we had. It was a small house. It only had 2 bedrooms, and that was a garage divided in half with a curtain between our room and Mom and Dad's. My 3 brothers and I slept in the front part of it, and Mom and Dad slept in the back. And there was a nice living room with a hardwood floor and a dining room and a little kitchen. That was the whole place on an acre of land. I just had to stay out there. Of course, there was always plenty to do. It was a lot of things to do, but it just seemed so strange. I was being cut out. And I looked back through that big bay window and I could see another couple in there visiting with my mom and dad. And everybody looked real serious. And after that, Mom and Dad were converted. They changed. Everything changed. No more movies, no more traveling to baseball and football games together as a family. No more doing anything except going to church. Well, not anything, but most of the time we went to church. We went to church twice on Sunday, once in the middle of the week. And sometimes we went to church as often as 30 nights in a row, up and down the San Joaquin, Sacramento Valley, going to all the different one-cup churches of Christ. I'll tell you about the one cup a little later. Going to all these churches every night for months at a time. And our whole life began to revolve around this big change in our life. And after that, then I learned about the day that was going to come, when the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair, when the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. And so will you, brothers and sisters. Every one of you will be there too. Not only that, on that day, all the seas will give up its dead. All those who died will rise from the dead and will all stand before Jesus. The sky is going to open up, and there's going to be Jesus on his great big golden throne with his hair flying in the wind and 1,000 angels singing and all kinds of music and all kinds of scary stuff. And Jesus is going to sit down with a great big book of life. He's going to open it up, and he's going to go down through that book of life, and he's going to find you, and he's going to find me. And that's when we're going to find out if we're goats who go to that fiery lake, or sheep who need to go to heaven with Jesus. And I didn't know after that whether I should be more scared of the devil, the bombs, or Jesus coming back. And somebody took my water. Here's, sorry. A jackling preacher is a preacher who preaches in a storefront church, kind of like this little space right here. A jackleg preacher is kind of hobbled. He can't go out and preach all the time because he's got family, or he's got responsibilities, or he's got a little business of some kind, but he tries to preach as much as he can. A jackleg preacher. My daddy was a jackleg preacher, preaching in a storefront church. The church out on the boulevard. It used to be a cleaners, but now it was a church. Put in a little stage up front with a little perch. My daddy was a big man, so he made it pretty high, because daddy was a high podium guy. Then he got those rainbow seats from the Rainbow Theater, where we used to go to movies when we were little boys. He got those rainbow seats from the Rainbow Theater, where we used to go to movies when we were little boys. Going to those Saturday matinees, he got those rainbow seats. Pretty soon we had a church, we had a door, we had some seats, we had a stage, we had a podium, we had songbooks in every seat. And people in those rainbow seats from the Rainbow Theater, where we used to go to movies when we were little boys. Well, things got off to a pretty good start there. People started coming, just right off the bat. Dad was just very committed to going out and talking to people. After that, he wasn't around very much. He was always off visiting people. He was committed to getting people to come to his church. And so he'd be going and visiting, holding Bible studies with people in their home, and then we'd all sit and wait and see who was going to show up come Wednesday night, or Sunday morning, or Sunday night. He worked hard to get people to come. Not only that, but to really have a good, large congregation, the best thing to do is to have some revival, some gospel meetings. That is a meeting that happens every night for 10 nights. They start on Friday night and have preaching every night from Friday through Sunday, every night of the week. And then on Sunday you have preaching day and night and singing in the afternoon and dinner on the grounds with all the congregation. Well, a good idea would be to have somebody come in from some far off place and preach. So Daddy started preacher shop. Now every organization, whether it's a church or a political organization of any note, has its party organ. For example, the Communist Party has the Workers' newspaper, or the left has the Nation magazine, or the right has the Standard. Well, we in the One Cup Church of Christ, and I'll tell you about that One Cup a little bit later on, we in the One Cup Church of Christ have the Old Paths Advocate. And in the Old Paths Advocate, it was run by a couple of guys named Homer L. Gay and Homer Lee from Lee Summit, Missouri. They had this nice little strip where they had a little newspaper, and then they sold songbooks to all the brotherhood. They got them from the Stamps Baxter Music Company in Fort Worth, Texas, real cheap, and then they put them in little books and sold them to the brotherhood. Here's a sample of one of their little books called The Old Paths Hymnal right here. I've got several of them, been collecting them and trying to hang on to them. Well, these brethren had in the back of their little magazine, they had little reports from preachers from all over the country. These evangelists who were traveling all around the country, preaching down in Kentucky or down in Tennessee or over in Missouri or out in Oklahoma or down in Texas, these guys would write in reports to this paper, and they'd say, well, we baptized 6, and we had 2 come forward and confess their sins, and 4 people were restored to the faith. And we'd watch that kind of a report. They talk about, oh, we went down here and we preached there, and we preached here and we preached there, and over here we baptized 2 or 3 people, and then over here we restored 1, and here we had 5 people confess their sins. You see, if you were baptized, that was for the remission of sins. And you could, that's how you got salvation. For example, to be saved, here's what you got to do, brothers and sisters. First, you got to hear the Word of God. And when you hear it, then you got to believe it. You got to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And then you repent of your sins. That just simply means that you stop living one way and you start living the other. For example, you're walking down this way and you turn around and you walk back this way. That way was hell, this way was heaven. You've got to live right. You've got to change your ways. You've got to quit treating your wife and your children the way you treat them. You've got to quit that heavy drinking and all that doping you've been doing, all that running around with other women or other men. You've got to live right. You've got to treat your bosses right, your family right. Repent of your sins. Change your ways. Turn yourself around. Oh, I've seen many a person, a down-and-out drunkard, a down-and-out drunkard, a down-and-out coke addict, a down-and-out person turn their life around. Change their life completely and live a good life, a prosperous life by getting themselves straight, by repenting of their sins. And then, once you repent, you need to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of your sins. Now, when you're baptized, I'm talking about being dipped in water, raised to walk in newness of life. So that's what we call the plan of salvation. We preached it constantly, brothers and sisters, all over the country. So we started shopping for preachers. And these preachers would come and preach in our church. Why, there was Brother Billy Jack Ivy, who when he preached and when he sang, he would often flutter his eyes like this. It was very interesting. These guys were very interesting to me. And when he preached, he would draw on an easel, and he'd draw a whole picture in colored chalk, so that the sermon, he would give somebody in the audience his beautiful little work of art that had maybe pictures of heaven or hell or whatever he was preaching on, and it was very nice. And then there was Brother E.B. Roden, who was a former Kirby vacuum cleaner salesman, a very red guy with very piercing blue eyes. He always looked good in the blue suit, I thought. Brother Reardon would like to speak of the way and the why and the which and the wherefore, about the essentials and non-essentials, he'd write this on the blackboard, surrounding the essential plan of salvation. On that today. By the time you got them writing it on the blackboard, church was over. And then there was Brother E.H. Miller. Brother Miller always liked to hitch his pants like this when he was preaching. And he'd get himself all worked up. And he had a handkerchief in his hand. And he'd be wiping his brow while he was preaching. And he'd be preaching to you like this, brothers and sisters. He'd be preaching and he'd say, I came to a little street out there on the desert. I stopped, there was a stop sign there, I didn't see, I looked way down that way, I didn't see anybody coming. I looked way down that way, I didn't see anybody coming. So I just kind of oozed on across that intersection. I no more than sooner than got across that intersection, and a police officer pulled me over. He came up to my car and he said, Brother Miller, you ran that stop sign back there. I said, well, officer, I looked way down that way, I didn't see anybody coming. I looked way down that way and I didn't see anybody coming. So I thought I'd just kind of ooze across that intersection. And the officer said, Brother Miller, S-T-O-P doesn't spell ooze. One day at a dance contest. I was very excited. There was one little cute little black-eyed girl that I really liked named Nancy Stone. And you know, I'd already found out that when she and I danced together, we just glided around that dance floor like nobody's business. And it was a contest, so I got Nancy Stone, got her up kind of close, and we started dancing. And for a long time we were dancing, and the judges would come around and they'd take this person and take them off the floor. And then they'd watch a little bit, and then they'd take this person and take them off the floor. And that one, and this one, and that one, and this one. But Nancy Stone and I, we just had to ride on this. And when it was all over, we won the contest. We were the winners. Oh, I was so excited. You know, Mom and Dad had given me some tap dancing before they got converted. And so I felt like I was a pretty good dancer. I came home all elated, ran in the front door. Mom, Dad, I won the dance contest at school. Well, that was met with kind of a silence. And kind of a little bit of shock when my parents fall apart. And then my dad said, son, come and sit down here for a minute. Now my daddy, he didn't want to impose his will on me. He was always trying to convince me that I need to do what I think is right. And so he began to talk to me about why dancing was a sin. Why it was wrong to dance according to the Bible. And he began to show it to me. Now he didn't want me to make this decision on my own, on his say-so, but he wanted to just show me. And after about an hour, hour and a half, I made the decision that dancing was a sin. And I never danced again until I was almost 30 years old. Watching you, there's an all-seeing eye watching you, all along on the road to the soul's true abode. There's an eye watching you. Every step that you take, this great eye is awake. There's an all-seeing eye watching you. Watching you, watching you. There's an all-seeing eye watching you. I'm laying in bed in this long back porch across the back of my grandpa's place in Enterprise, California, which is just across the Sacramento River in Redding, California. Oh, Enterprise was wild back in those days. Now it's all houses as far as you can see. It's on the road up to Mount Lassen. But back in those days, it was scrub manzanita and oak and live oak and red dirt. And it was tough, wild country. My grandma and grandpa lived out there on that country. They had a couple of acres out there, but they were from West Texas. They knew how to live on that kind of land. They'd been living on that kind of land most of their lives, and they felt right at home up there. Way out at the back of the place, Grandpa had some pens where he had 23 blue-tick hounds. And very often, in the middle of the night, you could hear all 23 of these dogs, what a cacophony you couldn't believe, all getting ready. And my grandpa and a couple of those barrel house sons of his would be heading off out into the vast, wide open spaces and down along Cow Creek, hunting for coon and possum all night long. And the goal was to get those dogs to tree something, and then they could go down there and pop it. Grandpa's place also had golden pheasants. And off to one side, he had one little shed all completely devoted to taxidermy. Oh yeah, if you were a little squirrel or rabbit or chipmunk that got found along the side of the road, it wouldn't be long until you'd be sitting on a little branch, just looking real healthy and cheerful, except for the fact you weren't alive. Grandpa was great at it. He made a little money on the side. Stuffing animals. Well, I was laying on this back porch, and on the far end of it, and there's a little curtain here, and I can hear voices. It's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I looked out. Everybody thought I was asleep. I was just one kid. Nobody wasn't paying any attention to me. I looked down at the other end, and I could see my mom and dad silhouetted on the curtain on that end of the room, sitting on my grandfather's bed, my grandma and grandpa's bed, and my dad was crying. I was only about 6 years old. Dad was crying. That's really strange. We'd moved all the way up there from Monrovia, California. We'd been doing great down in Monrovia, and then all of a sudden, they announced we had to move north. And we did. We just gave up everything and left. what had really happened was my dad had a very successful painting business going on in Monrovia, where he had been raised and where him and mom had gone to Monrovia High, and they'd been very successful. Dad was well known all over that area as a baseball player and a really good athlete who nearly played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And also as a painter. He had his own bowling team, he had his own ball team, he played semi-pro ball. He was a president of the junior chamber, he was a member of the junior chamber of commerce, but he was also the president of the San Gabriel Valley Young Christian Association, associated with the Christian Church, which they attended back in those days. I mean, they'd had a great life, but they had to give it all up because that bookkeeper that Dad hired, that he took on as a partner, took all the money and went to Mexico. And left Mom and Dad sitting there with nothing. In fact, less than nothing. They were so deep in debt they couldn't do anything. And my dad was sitting down there at that end of the room crying about it. It was just devastating to him. Oh, he could have turned to my mother's parents. They had some money. They were Republicans. But he was too proud to go there. And I guess his dad had a little paint job he could do, and so we moved up north. We stayed there at Grandma and Grandpa's for a little while, and it wasn't long until we were in a tent on the Sacramento River, just south of there, about 20 miles, in Anderson, California, right along the banks of the river. That was personally. The river roaring by, the bridge across the river, all the people fishing for the salmon. My Uncle Wes up there, about 18, 19 years old, snagging salmon off the top of that bridge late at night when nobody else was around. Sometimes, like a foolhardy, crazy fool, he'd climb down under that vast high bridge and untangle people's lines for them. I thought that was a really crazy thing to do, but I couldn't have helped admire his bravado. I can remember then, pretty soon we were in a little cabin, and then we were eating bear meat, deer meat, and beautiful salmon and steelhead. Dad fought a steelhead for 4 hours up and down the river, all afternoon, even into after dark. And finally he pulled out a 16-pound steelhead, and we had a great dinner that night. Well, mighty sad right there. My parents didn't seem to know what to do. Then we moved to Wairika, and then eventually we ended up in Sacramento. I was right along with my uncle and my dad sitting in the front seat, and I'm laying in the back again asleep, and they think I don't know what's going on. But over here, my Uncle Archie, after talking about his marriage that was going on the rocks to a woman in San Francisco, finally he says, Sacramento's a working man's town. And it wasn't long until we were living in a tenement house in downtown Sacramento for a company there. Shall we gather at the river, the beautiful river, gathered with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. We landed on the Sacramento River down in Sacramento. And it wasn't long till we had a little house out in Carmichael, the one I was telling you about. We also had a lot of chickens, pigs, goats, sheep, fruit trees, lots of hoeing to be done, lots of grapes to be cleaned, and lots of strawberries to get the devil weed out of. And we lived there for the next 10 years. We grew up, my brothers and I, in that place there. Now, who here, brothers and sisters, knows what a dispensation is? Anybody? I see a show of hands. A dispensationalist is a person who believes that the Bible is the unerring Word of God. We speak where the Bible speaks. We are silent where the Bible is silent. Bible things in Bible ways. We call Bible things by Bible names, brothers and sisters. That's why we call it the Church of Christ. Jesus said to the Apostle Peter, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Now, if I told you I was going to go out here and build my house, whose name would I put on the mailbox? Would I put John the Baptist's name on the mailbox? No, I wouldn't. I put my own name on the mailbox. And that's what Jesus did with his church. He built his church, and that's why we call it the Church of Christ. Church of Jesus Christ. Well, the Church of Jesus Christ started out a movement called the Restoration Movement. I mean, it claims to go all the way back to the very beginning. And that the disciples met and did exactly what we did in this way. One of the main things that we did was we had one cup in our communion service. We believed that when we took communion, the Bible said he took the cup at the Last Supper, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And we believed that was the way the communion should be done. And so when we had communion, we had one cup on that table. And that was the way everybody had communion up until about 1940s in the Church of Christ, until Brother Brewer introduced individual communion cups into the service. And right then and there, the shit hit the fan. There was a big division over the cup question. There were those who thought it'd be all right to use little individual drinking cups. But the one cup brethren said, no, this is the way it has to be done. And if you use more than one cup, you're going to hell, because that's not the way the Bible teaches it to be done. That's right. The one cup question. And I grew up going to debates on the cup question. Oh yeah, I've been where they had to have loudspeakers outside the church because there were so many people there to hear J. Irvin Waters debate Mr. Porter on the cup question. And you can buy the book. You can buy the book recording this debate. How many cups there should be on the communion table. If you use more than one, you're going to hell. And then there was the bread question. Now we believed you had to have one loaf of unleavened bread that you had to pitch off of a piece and eat it when it was passed to you in communion. And this had to be done every Sunday, by the way. There were those, the bread breakers we called them, who believed the bread should be broken in the middle. There were also those who believed that everybody should get a little wafer of their own. Well, we were the one cuppers and one loaf of unleavened bread, and I grew up going to debates on the bread breaking question. So you had the cup question, you had the bread breaking question, and then there was the very first big issue that swept the entire brotherhood and split the church bigger than any of it, and that was the music question. Whether or not it would be all right to use an instrument of music in the worship service. I believed it was wrong. The Bible taught that you should sing and make melody in your hearts unto the Lord. But again, man slipped in the picture, brothers and sisters. He slipped into the picture and introduced a guitar or an organ into the worship service. We didn't hold to that. And I grew up going to debates on the music question. Whether or not it was all right to use an organ or an instrument of music in the worship service. We believed that if you used one, you were going to hell. And at these debates, you'd listen to these vast arguments which would go on for a long time, and you'd root for your side. You didn't necessarily even listen to the other side. You just kind of wanted to make sure your guy presented your position in the right way. So there was the cup question, the break question, the music question. Then there was Sunday school. We believed that Sunday school was wrong. I'm sorry to tell you that. We believed that Sunday school was wrong. That if you were practicing Sunday school in your church, you were going to go to the devil's hell. Because the Bible taught that the disciples came together to break bread. It didn't say they divided them up into little classes and sent them off to have church in various ways. And also, how important would it be to have your children sitting next to you while somebody was teaching them religious and spiritual values? We believe that was very important, and that that's the way God wanted it, and if you did it some other way, you were going to hell. I know that sounds harsh, doesn't it, brothers and sisters? That's the way it was. Well, then there was the peripheral issues, like the hair question. How long should a woman's hair be? We believe that the Bible taught that a woman's hair should never be cut, that it should be grown long and never be cut. And that if a woman cut her hair, she was a disgrace to her husband. She was going against the Scripture. The Bible, Apostle Paul said that a woman's hair is given to her for a covering, and that a woman should worship God with a covering on her head. And the hair question, we just believed the women had to have long hair, and that went way back. I mean, in the Restoration movement, in the early 1800s, when everybody decided they wanted to go back to the Bible. You see, that was the back to the Bible. Speak what the Bible speaks, be silent what the Bible is silent, do Bible things in Bible ways, call Bible things by Bible names. People started looking at it that way, and these women, they didn't cut their hair anymore, and pretty soon they'd have buns on the back of their head, and the buns became known as Campbellite buns, after Alexander Campbell, one of the great leaders of that movement, of the early Restoration movement. Back then they didn't divide up the churches. They were just trying to fight these modern techniques that were coming into religion, and this modern scientific thought. Darwin and all those guys were creeping in, and something had to be done. And so the battle was raged all through that 1800s over all of these issues. I believed that we needed to go back to the Bible and do it in the Bible way. And they knew. Of all the people on God's green earth, the fundamentalists can figure it out. He's the one who God has revealed these truths to. It's there for everybody, but only a certain number of people seem to figure it out. Oh yeah, many are called, but few are chosen, brothers and sisters. Well, I was standing out by the road in Houston, Oklahoma, right across the street from Daddy Bill and Mom Tate's house. It was across the street from a great pasture with all kinds of cattle out in it. And I used to love to walk way across that pasture. This is when I became a young preacher. I used to walk way out there and climb up on top of a big old water, what do you call them, one of those big structures that you keep water in. I'd get up on top of that and pray and read and think and practice preaching. I loved it out there. And I'm standing out there by the road with Daddy Bill, who's an old, seasoned oil field worker who used to dip snuff and smoke tobacco and drink pretty hard and lived pretty hard back in the early Depression days. But now he had a beautiful wife and some beautiful daughters, and he had mellowed with time. Mom Tate was just great. And they had a couple of pretty nice looking daughters too. I was kind of sweet on Cletus, the oldest one at the time. I was only 17 years old. And I'm standing out there by the road with Daddy Bill, and he says, Law, grew up in one world, lived in another. I thought, wow, that's heavy. That's just the way life is. I was sitting down in Paris, Texas on the front porch with M. Linwood Smith, the preacher I was traveling with back in those days. I was sitting down on that front porch, and Maud, the woman who lived there in that house, she was kind of a big woman, and she had this little parakeet that could say, I'm a Church Christ preacher, and a good one. I'm a Church Christ preacher, and a good one. We're sitting on the front porch when she came out. The bird had died, and she buried him there in the front yard right in front of us. It was very sad. Well, I was a Church Christ preacher, and a good one too at the time. I was learning to be a good one. I started traveling with a fellow by the name of M. Linwood Smith. Originally, I was going to travel with a guy by the name of J. Irvin Waters. But I ended up with M. Linwood Smith because J. Irvin Waters, when I got to the Sulphur meeting in Sulphur, Oklahoma, which was the big camp meeting where people came from all over the United States and stayed for a week, right there in the same little town, in hotels and campgrounds and everything, had church in the morning and church in the afternoon and church in the evening, where you could all the preachers who were there preach about 10, 15 minutes apiece, 5, 10 minutes apiece, where you could just sing, and I'm telling you, the singing was incredible. Because in this shape note music, which we were using and singing a cappella, there were all kinds of alto runs and bass runs and tenor runs, so that the music blended together in a beautiful, beautiful sound. It came out of the harpsichord style of music, and it still exists down there in the South today. A cappella singing, and it was beautiful. Well, I went down to travel with J. Irvin Waters, but when I got there, J. Irvin Waters had just gotten married. Actually, he had been married one time, and he got a divorce. And now he was remarried. This was very controversial. Certainly controversial with my grandpa up there in Enterprise, California. He didn't believe in the exception on the marriage questions. He believed that once you got married, you stayed married to that same individual for the rest of your life, no matter what. But there was a whole bunch of people, including J. Irvin Waters, who believed that if you were married and your spouse committed fornication, the scripture said you could remarry. Both sides of all these issues, that they could quote at you forever. And that was issue with no exception, the marriage question. And that split many churches. Men were heard to stand up in church and say, brethren, let's split the church over this kind of an issue right here. Well, so I started traveling with M. Linwood Smith. Now, J. Irvin Waters, he had been the great debater. He was the guy that was doing those debates. He was our guy that we put up to fight that battle for us because he was very erudite. And he would study a lot, and he sounded real intelligent. He had a real deep voice. He wore string ties. He had sideburns down to here. He was from Tennessee, and was a wonderful warrior for the Lord, as we would like to categorize him. But M. Linwood Smith was a little bit different. He was from Brookhaven, Mississippi, and he had been raised by his spinster mother and spinster aunt. His grandmother and his spinster aunt. His mother had died to give him birth. And he liked to preach, and he had what he called 2 handkerchief sermons, where he could really get the audience going. Well, anyway, I began to travel with M. Linwood Smith on a bus. And we traveled all over the United States. When we were going north to south, we traveled on trailways. When we went east to west, we traveled on Greyhound buses. That first night on our way from Houston, Oklahoma, down into the south, I couldn't help but thinking every time that wheel turned, I was further away from mom and dad and my brothers than I'd ever been in my life. As we rode down through the country into territory I had no idea what it was going to be like or where I was going. I was with Linwood, who I barely knew. That trip down, as I'm riding along, he starts talking to me. And he starts telling me about stuff I had no idea about. The whole other side of the picture. The whole drama about how he used to travel with Homer Day and Homer King, and how they were such good buddies, and how now they wouldn't even print his articles in the Old Paths Advocate. How when he sent in reports, they deleted parts of them and wouldn't put them in there because he had published a songbook of his own. He didn't like their hop, skip, and jump to Gloryland songs, which they bought from the Stamps Baxter Music Company, which in reality was a Holy Roller outfit. We weren't Holy Rollers. So, all night long, I hear the other side of the story. How Linwood has passed out his songbooks and they've taken them up and disappeared them before we could even have church at the big camp meeting in Sulphur. How they had treated him, and how they wouldn't talk to him anymore, and how they were deleting his messages in the Old Paths Advocate. And as I rode down, I had a whole new world opened up to me. Things weren't quite as simple as I thought. I remember when I got to Shreveport, Louisiana, I stepped down off of that bus, and it felt like a ton of water on me. I mean, I'd never been in such humidity in my life. And that trip then, we switched and we headed back east down to Mississippi. And I started getting pretty excited. The only thing I knew about Mississippi, I'd seen on Uncle Remus. And we went on down in there, and sure enough, there were those cross-cut fences. And we went down into the woods. We went down near Brookhaven and out east of there, and then down long roads. Pretty soon we came to a long road down at the end of which I could see a house. And we went down to that house, and that's where we stayed. And Linwood put me in that house. It had a big, long hallway down the center of it with rooms all down the sides. And these two wonderful women who were just great, who could just cook like crazy and made the best food and treated me like an honored guest. Linwood, on the other hand, was home. And he could drop some of that facade that he was using out on the highway. He could cuss a little bit. He could be just a regular guy. He could be bitching to his mom and his aunt, or his grandmother and his aunt, and to me. The first night he put me they put me in a back room there at the very back of the house in the little library. I remember how musty it smelled, how nobody was really there very often. It was very damp country anyway. And I'm laying there, hashing over all that's happened, and being in this very strange place. And there was nothing darker than dark when the lights went out in the backwoods of Mississippi. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, way off in the distance, I could hear people singing, "Oh, happy day, oh, happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray and live rejoicing every day. Oh, happy day, oh, happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away." And I knew exactly what was happening. I knew from the sound of the singing that they were African Americans down there, black people, having a baptism at a pond or a creek that was way back off in there. I hadn't been around the property yet. I hadn't seen everything, but I knew somebody was having a baptism because May was the night when we were rousted out of bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, when somebody just couldn't wait not 1 minute longer to get dipped in that baptismal water so their souls would be saved. They couldn't wait till morning. What if they died before morning? They'd be lost to a devil's hell. And my daddy's standing up there in the middle of the water, headlights out across the water. We'd be down at the American River, all cars pulled up so the headlights would shine out across the water. And Daddy'd be standing out there raising his hand up with a wet handkerchief in his hand and a young boy, girl, man, woman hanging onto his arm. And he'd say, "I now baptize thee in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, into the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of your sins." And then he'd clasp that handkerchief over those people's face and dip them down in the water, pull them back up, and then we'd all sing, "Oh, happy day, oh, happy day." Well, I got to where I dipped with many a person there. How, anybody here ever been dipped? Has anybody been dipped? No. Oh my goodness, we got a lot of dipping to do here. All right, brothers and sisters, Church of Christ. So eventually, I traveled all over the United States. When I traveled with Linwood Smith for several years, every time he'd preach here, I'd preach here, and here, all around him. Every Wednesday night, sometimes I'd go off over here and preach a weekend, and then we'd hook up again, and we'd travel to another part of the country. We traveled constantly, from coast to coast, preaching from cover to cover. Finally, after quite a long time, and each time, every time I got a chance, I'd drive back to California so I could see Lola, my little girlfriend who I'd grown up with. When I was a young preacher, why, she and I would travel all over those, up and down the valley in Sacramento and the San Joaquin, going from church to church. I'd preach from the time I was 17. I'd go and preach in a little church here, a little church there. People were so glad to see us, this beautiful young couple, so full of goodness and energy. And we'd come and we'd preach and we'd lead them in singing, which they all loved. And it was a wonderful thing, and we did that. And whenever I had a chance to go back and be with Lola and to see my mom and dad in Sacramento, that's exactly what I do. And when I went back, I had to get a job. I'll tell you a little bit about that job I got a little bit later on. But whenever I'd go home, I'd get a job and stay there, and then pretty soon, and then I'd do a few preaching gigs too, and then I'd take back off. And the way I got these preaching gigs was people would write to me, because I had read those reports in the back of the Old Paths Advocate. And they'd invite me to come and preach. And if I was going to Dallas, Texas, I went to Texas every year for 10 years, down into Texas, Wichita Falls, Dallas, Fort Worth, Paris, Texas, Graham, Texas, Jacksboro, Texas, all kinds of Texas, preaching the gospel. And whenever I'd go down in there, why, people were glad to see me and treat me really great. And they would invite me. And on my way, I'd write other people and tell them I'd be in your area on Wednesday night, I could speak at your church. And I'd be in your area on Tuesday night, and I'd speak at your church. And everybody give me a few bucks, whatever they thought I might need, based on how much they liked the preaching I was doing, or how much they liked me, that personal connection I had with them, or how much money they had as a little congregation. I never asked for money ever. I was always supplied with enough money to meet all my needs. I always drove a brand new car. I always wore a nice suit. I had a beautiful wife. Eventually, I had 2 beautiful little boys, and we traveled all over the United States. But finally, before I got married, I really wanted to get married. I wanted to be with Lola a lot more than I was being able to be with her, and I wanted to strike out on my own. So one day, I was there at the house in Mississippi with Linwood, and I said, Linwood, that's what I want. I want to get out on my own and try it on my own. He said, well, it's funny you mention that, Lee, because I just got a call today about a little church in the Panhandle of Florida that needs a preacher. I think we can get you set up down there. Wow, so excited. So there I went, down into the Panhandle of Florida, just about 26 miles west of Tallahassee, Florida, in a little town called Quincy. And actually, where I was about 6 miles outside of that town, in a little bump in the road called Gretna, Florida. And my church was a little further down that road, Highway 90, at a little church called the Mount Pleasant Church of Christ. It was a beautiful little brick church set back off the highway in the little knotty pines of Florida. Florida is full of those knotty pines, those scrub pines. My little church was just a beautiful little church down there. And I was happy. Oh man, this was an opportunity. I stayed with the Carnegie family. They had 2 daughters about my age. It's funny, just on the day I was working on this piece, at rehearsal, I got a call one day from the youngest daughter. She's now in her 60s. Back then she was, and we became very good friends. They just took me into their family and adopted me and loved me. And then eventually I came back to California, got Lola, got married, said goodbye to my grandpa Beck, who was dying at the time, unbeknownst to me, and took off for Florida. Lola and I went down to Florida, and there we lived. Sister Carnegie said, when we first met you, when you told us you were going to marry, we were afraid she wouldn't be good enough for you. But now that we've met Lola, we're afraid you're not good enough for her. They liked her. And down there in Florida, we got us a nice little house right across the highway from the folks in Gretna. We had a nice little house with a great big yard. Me and the Presbyterian preacher started coaching Pop Warner football. And I was kind of kicking back, enjoying being a preacher in this little town. I had my nice little church. I was getting a nice little salary. We had to go into that house and kill all the cockroaches and clean the whole place up. And we no sooner than got there after washing all the walls down and everything, that my Lola suddenly had contractions in the middle of the night, and she was only 7 months pregnant. And that night, 18 minutes after I got her down to the hospital with the help of Sister Carnegie and her 1959 Chevrolet, rushing down the back roads to get to the hospital in time, Nathan, my oldest son, was born. So it was a good time down there in Florida. The day came when one Sunday morning, on Easter Sunday, I was standing out on the porch. The church was absolutely full. This was good. The church was full of people. I was having good luck. Because I went around and I talked to people and I tried to get people to come to church. And I could get people to come to church. And I liked that. And people would come. We filled the church up. And of course, on Easter, everybody goes anyway. And I'm standing out on the porch. And a fellow came off the road. A black fellow came right over. Stood right down there off the porch from me. Looked up at me. He was in his 50s. And he said, do you mind if I come and have church here? It's 50 miles to the nearest black church. And I can't get there. And I just want to worship. It's Easter and everything. Do you mind if I could just come in there and sit in the back? I said, well, I don't see anything wrong with it, but I knew there were certain, fears there in the South. I'd seen those freedom riders already down in Tallahassee at the drugstore. I'd been following all this stuff in the newspapers as I rode on the buses up and down and back and forth across the United States. I read newspapers in every town in America that I went through practically. For years, I was up on stuff. But we didn't practice politics. We didn't participate. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God is God. We didn't vote. We didn't join the military. We didn't participate in these matters. Although I felt like I probably should do something. And here was this man standing here asking if he could have church. So I went in, I asked Brother Cornigan, and he said, well, I don't see what it hurt. So I put the man at the very back of the church so we could pass that one cup to him last. Looking back on it, I should have put him right up there in the front, passed it to him first, and said, now what are you going to do about it? But anyway, I was trying to be, respectful of everybody's judgment. Well, by that afternoon, word that black man had church with us hit town. J.D. Bradshaw was face down in bacon and eggs in a little restaurant there in Quincy when he heard the guys in the booth behind him say, what we ought to do with that preacher from California is tar and feather him and run him out of town. J.D., who I consider to be one of my weaker members because he didn't come to church that regular. Anyway, he proved that there was weak and there was weak. He jumped up, twirled around and landed and said, y'all leave that boy alone. Y'all don't think nothing of sending thousands of dollars out here to Africa to preach to niggers. Now you leave us alone if we want to go out here in the country and preach to a few of them. Every day people were saying stuff to me. Every day it got scarier and scarier. Well, the old gentleman had asked me if it would be possible for me to come out to the country there on Sunday afternoons and have church with him and some of the people out that way. He had some property just not far from my church there, and I said, sure, I'd love to do that. That was great. That's why I was there, was to have church with people and to convert people. So I started going out there on Sunday. And then he confided to me that he'd like to start a black church out there. I mean, there were a lot of people who wanted to have a church out there, and they saw it the way we saw it, so let's start a church. So I wrote to some brethren in San Antonio, Texas, and they sent me enough money to get a tent. And I had already just been up into Sampson, Alabama, just across the border there, where there was a lot of churches. And I'd been up there and I met this black evangelist by the name of Cicero Goddard. He had one arm, like 9 hours of having his degree at the University of Cincinnati in law. He could preach in the traditional black style, African-American style in the South, where he could talk just like he was a lawyer. He was a very smart guy. And he'd moved into that country. He had gone to a Methodist church that didn't believe in dipping for baptism, had converted the entire congregation away from Masonism, and baptized 35 people, took over the church, painted it bright pink, and had made himself a home there. And this brother had arrived at the one cup and all the same things we'd arrived at, and nobody had ever heard of him before. It's just proved what everybody used to say, that if you come up with the one cup Church of Christ, just like we had, well, Brother Cicero was a dynamic speaker, and I was so thrilled to have him. But now we had a tent. So I said, let's do it. And so Brother Cornigan, Brother Cicero, after he had been to my house, we'd fed him, Lola and I had fed him dinner, and we'd had to pull down all the shades when he and his wife Patricia and their son Sputnik had come to visit us. And we'd, been living kind of dangerously, because this was the civil rights movement. This was in the panhandle of Florida. This is the home of the KKK. This is where black people in 2000 or in 2004. And that was nothing new, brothers and sisters, nothing new. They never get to vote. Never have, probably will. Well, anyway, Brother Cicero and I went out there to put up that tent with Brother Cornegie, and we're just working like crazy, and the man come out there from the electric company. Now this was a little guy, very red man. I mean, he was as red as a red man could be. He had a red chest, he had a red face, he had a red head, he had red arms, he had a red neck, definitely a red neck. He was red from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And maybe, I don't know about his toenails, he might have been red too. But he liked to wear uniforms, I could tell that. He was wearing a blue one right there that had a little light bulb on it, like he had a good idea. He was from the electric company. He stood there, and it was obvious he wasn't very approving. Carnegie, come over here! He says, Brother Carnegie, Brother Carnegie went over there, and I'm watching while we're working away. Brother Carnegie came back over to me. I said, what did he say? He said, you don't like the way that neighbor was telling us what to do. He's the only one who knows how to put up the tent. So we got the tent up. And then Brother Cicero and I put a big loudspeaker on this big blue Cadillac that he had, an old blue Cadillac. And he and I drove all the way, all around down in all the districts around Quincy, Florida, and all the little homes around there where the black folks lived, announcing our gospel meeting and passing out flyers. And word got out that we were going to go ahead with this project. We're going to go ahead and have this gospel meeting out there on this man's property, and we did. And the first night, we had it all set up.